So what I'm going to talk about today is when aggression in dogs is a cry for help, because one of the things that's really begun to bother me is that we've never had a great set of definitions for different types of aggression. And here in Atlantic Canada, where veterinary behavioral medicine is relatively new, I suddenly realized we're seeing a lot of people and a lot of dogs where they say the dog's aggressive and it's not. They say the dog's being normal and the dog's aggressive. And I just think that it's time to start seeing this from the canine's point of view. This picture, by the way, are two of my youngest dogs. This is Annie, the love of my life, and this is the puppy she raised. They're separated by 18 months of age. This is Gabriel. He is an Australian Shepherd. He has a genetic defect, a known genetic defect for coat color. He's got the diluent gene, and he's also bald. So he's gray and bald, and he's an interesting boy. And by the way, they are playing. There are dog toys here, and they are wrestling over who's going to get the dog toy. And you know that this is play because you can see the upper gums of both of these dogs. They've rolled back their lips. They communicate this way. I know that it looks like he's snarling. He's got a wrinkled face. She's showing every tooth in her mouth, except you can see the back of her throat. You can see underneath her throat. The same thing for them. This is just very forceful play, and it's noisy. So let's talk about how common canine aggression is, because this is the thing that gets dogs killed. And one of the really damaging things about the strike was we weren't able to see clients who needed rechecks, and we've ended up with a bunch of dead dogs. And that shouldn't happen. And it happens because people need help and they need somebody to help them all along. And when you can't see your patients, you've got a problem. So how common is canine aggression? Well, in the first study on prevalence that was done out of Hannes Lohi's lab in Finland, Katrina Tira did it. They looked at 3,284 questionnaires, and these are questionnaires, okay? The problem here is you're going to see that they show you that aggression towards unfamiliar people occurred in 43.6% of the dogs, and aggression towards unfamiliar dogs occurred in 72% of the dogs. Now, let me tell you how they got there, because they asked people to look at barking and growling or biting and snapping, and they scored these. So when they looked at aggressiveness towards strangers or unfamiliar dogs or to the owner, they scored a sum of frequencies of 1 to 4 for 1 for barking, 2 for growling, 3 for snapping, and 4 for biting. So every dog that barked was considered aggressive. And I have a real problem with that. I think I may have a problem with clients identifying growling correctly. I'm reasonably certain most people would think my dogs are killing each other, and they are not. Snapping and biting is something we can get closer to, but we are often talking to clients about accidental bites versus deliberate or intentional bites. There's a lot of stuff here that's just a mess, and that's part of our problem. Okay, so when they looked at these data, though, and granted, I think that the prevalence is exaggerated here, they did look at associations, and they found that if you were fearful, there was a significant association between these 3 broad categories of aggressiveness. These are not diagnoses, these are descriptions of dogs. If you reacted to noises, certainly towards people and unfamiliar people and dogs, and if you had separation anxiety, there was a heightened incidence of an association. And I think what this speaks to more than anything else is the fact that aggression in dogs is an anxiety disorder, and there's huge comorbidity. You know, diagnoses like neurological conditions live in the same brain. And once you're reactive to one set of things, you may be more reactive to another. And depending which regions of your brain are involved and where you have different densities of neurons or how your receptors are distributed, it's not surprising to me that we see these comorbidities. And we should understand that anxiety is what's driving most of the canine behavior problems. Once you have one problem, you probably have another problem, especially if this has gone on for a while, and we need to look for them. Nick Dodman's group conducted a very similar study where they looked at 4,114 dogs. Their questions were different, and they dropped the barking. Okay, so they were very aware of the problems here. And they looked at growling, snarling, snapping, lunging, and biting. They had phrased the questions a little differently so that they could find out exactly what was going on. And then they would lump and rate some of these. And when they looked at the prevalence of behavior problems by category, they found out that all of the aggression complaints together were second to fear and anxiety. And when they looked at the prevalence of the specific behavior problems, that's the lovely Gabriel barking and Missy Rose taking him on. I'm sort of hoping that stops soon. I came home to do this because I've had literally no sleep and I was afraid of staying at the university longer and falling asleep on the way home. So when they looked at the different types of aggressions, and you can see that these are not diagnoses. Unfamiliar dogs on a walk on a lead. I think a lot of dogs react to dogs on a lead, another dog in the home, strangers visiting the home. And remember the things that they look at: growling, snarling, snapping, lunging, biting. Unfamiliar dogs visiting the home, strangers away from the home. And these incidents, if you look at the prevalence of these things, this is pretty low. The highest you got was 16%. Trainers was less than 1%. Groomers was 1.3%. Vets was 3.9%. Familiar people in the home, I mean, this is 7%. This is not a lot. But these are the types of things they saw in this survey. And this is the general public talking about aggressive behaviors that their dogs show, based on non-specific signs, which leads us to the question of what actually is aggression. Okay, I mean, I get that dogs bite and snarl and lunge and snap and bite and growl and all of that. But when you go to look at the ethological definition, the traditional ethological definition of what is called agonistic behavior is any social interaction or engagement which involves threatening behavior, displays, forceful engagement, and communication. Okay, it can involve fighting, but generally this results in retreats, placation, submission or resolution, or conciliation. In agonistic behavior, two things matter. One is the communication aspect, that this is really about communication. And the second thing is they work it out, okay? And that is not the patient generally that I'm seeing, unless somebody brings me a patient that's being misdiagnosed. And I think that now is the time to talk about what communication does for us. And if you understand what communication does for us, agonistic behavior becomes clear, and what dogs are telling you when they exhibit true aggressive behaviors becomes important and meaningful. When you look at the science of communication and information transfer, what you find here is that informations that most usefully shared by communication is information that's not otherwise available. So when you actively communicate something, it's because that information wouldn't otherwise be available to the observer. Such information is not obtained by the recipients that are distant, inattentive, or preoccupied. So you have to be in proximity of the communication signal. Olfactory signals have a different distance than auditory signals. Visual signals have a different distance yet. But if you're not paying attention or you're preoccupied, you miss it. Okay. Information that's essentially private to the communicator, that would be inaccessible to others, is made available through the behavior of communicating. And that is the take-home message, is that communicators and recipients continually assess information and choose actions. And why are they assessing this information? Because the information that would otherwise be private is revealed when you communicate. And that's what a growl tells you. That's what a lunge tells you. It tells you something about the underlying emotional state of the individual delivering that signal. As such, communicating information aids in risk, social cohesion, or social disruption. So in agonistic behavior, the ultimate goal is communicating in social cohesion or resolution. And when we get to aggression, this falls apart and doesn't work. And that's the social disruption. So some examples of aggressive behaviors that is functioning as an agonistic signal then in the true pathological aggression sense are in the next few videos. So these dogs are not pathologically aggressive. They're showing signals, and this presentation is mostly videos. I have to tell you that. I'm going to talk through most of the videos, but there's a good 20 minutes of video in this presentation. But in these cases, these are signals that dogs give. And they could give the same signal in a truly aggressive context and in an agonistic context. But these are behaviors that are really revealing something that would be hidden, and they are not pathologically aggressive. Okay, now this is just a photo. These are three of my dogs that are no longer with us, but this is a fabulous photo for a number of reasons. Toby was among the most remarkable dogs I've ever met. Pix, totally normal dog, got along with every dog he ever met in his life. And then there's little Linus, who cared a lot about food, puppy mill dog, starved puppy, really desperate for loads of things, undersized when we got him. And this is the kitchen of a beach house we used to rent. And Linus knows what time it is because his stomach is telling him that. Pick had already been lying down. Toby decided to come in off the porch and notice that Linus is standing there with his foot up with an intention gesture saying, if I want to, I can come get you. And he's just staring at them. Nobody's growling, nobody's snarking, he's just staring. And look at these dogs who are much, much bigger than he is. Toby's twice his size. Toby's turning his head and neck away, Pic's turning his head and neck away in the other direction, and Linus has made clear that, okay, I'm hungry, I'm waiting for dinner, don't mess with me. This is a low point in my day, and I'm pretty reactive until I get my food, and everybody's like, not a problem. Okay, so there is a communication signal that results in restoring order. Nobody gets hurt. Now, note how many of the aggressive behaviors and signals about the aggressive behaviors and signals are about communicating something. Not all of this is pathological. Dogs in our households are almost never born into them. They didn't grow up in them, and they don't need to like all the dogs we keep adding. Okay, they don't know them, they don't have the same relationships with them. But let's look at some of these behaviors on video. This is my oldest dog right now. This is a 30-second video that I must have spent 10 minutes trying to capture because every time I turned the video camera on, she stopped doing it. But this is another dog who cares about dinner time. And the young gray dog is approaching her, and this is what Missy Rose does. And that's my husband saying, you should have gotten the video. And I'll play it again. Watch as the little shirt goes by. Gabriel's wearing his sweater. Missy Rose doesn't uncross her legs. She doesn't do anything. She's just like, I'm in on my rug waiting for a meal to be produced. Don't mess with me. There you are. Okay, there's just her snarl. Okay. Here's the young dog bugging the dog who raised him. And he's decided lately, especially since I've gone back to work, he's going to mount her. And he takes a pretty dim view of that. You heard her growl at it. Now she's going to take him to school because he's going to keep trying. And listen to this lecture she is giving. She snarls. There was a snarl. He rubs against her. He rubs against the couch. She knows all his moves. He gets up. He'd really like to mount her. She barks. She snarls. She snaps at him. She puts her foot on his back. And then she puts his ears and his cheek in her mouth. Repeatedly. Okay. That's an agonistic behavior. That's a communication behavior. She just gave a lesson in how to be a normal dog. And then we've got some dogs who are on the edge, but they care about one thing, and they may care about it for irrational reasons, and you'll see that here. So one beagle walks past, and that was just my toy. If you're thinking of taking my toy, don't think of taking my toy. It's my toy. And here's the other beagle, like, I wasn't even thinking of taking your toy. Okay, there you go. Now, there is a signal that worked for both of them. when we talk about outright aggression, it's an appropriate or inappropriate inter or intra-specific challenge, threat, or contest that results in deference or in combat and resolution that ends that bout. That may not fix it forever. The resolution can range from a truce, which is the end stage of the definition of agonistic behavior, through a standoff that can result in death and decimation. In agonistic behavior, you can have fights, but the emphasis is on first resolving the situation. Standoffs don't do this. Standoffs mean we've taken a time out, but we're not done. Okay. And the second thing that agonistic behavior emphasizes is outcomes that allow animals of any species to continue to work and live together, not necessarily as they have been, but without major changes. Remember, retreat, placation, submission, resolution, conciliation. I don't use the word submission anymore. Nobody uses the word submission anymore, I hope. But it's in the original definition, so I've included it. And remember that context determines whether or not this behavior is appropriate. Okay, if somebody bangs you over the head, it might be nice if your dog bit them. If somebody hugs you, it might be nice if they don't. Okay. And when you look at the types of aggressions we can have, proactive aggression is primary and comprised of methodological and intention-driven behaviors. Reactive aggression is secondary to something happening. It could be pain, it could be arousal, it could be fear, impulsivity, as a reaction to a perceived or threatening stimulus. Okay, so in one case, you're doing this deliberately, volitionally. You're the aggressor, you're proactive. If it's an interaction, you're the aggressor and the reactive individual would be the victim. If it's simply that you are doing this volitionally, you're proactive. Both of these can be normal and both can be pathological or abnormal. We worry about abnormal behaviors, behaviors that are out of context and that are likely pathological. Now, when you talk about pathological aggression, you know you've got this when it's out of context given the social situation. The example is somebody who's trying to murder you or somebody who's trying to hug you, okay? Out of context given the trigger. You know, if I bump into you, stabbing me is not an appropriate response. The appropriate response in the US lately, I think, is just to shoot you because that's what we seem to be doing all the time. It's extreme in form or duration of response, including the signals. So this is an exaggerated behavior. It's often contextually unresponsive or exaggerated in response to whatever signal is received. So you either ignore it or you have a way disproportionate response. And it's stereotypic or relatively invariant given the context or the triggers within that once you know the things that set the dog off. And if you don't believe that, just videotape these dogs, make a collection of the videos, start to play them at fast forward, and you'll see the aggression follows a rule every single time. And that's what pathology is. Pathology is invariant. If you were normal, you could adapt to the circumstance. You wouldn't have to take somebody's head off. The way we screen these dogs, and we've been screening these dogs the same way for 25 years, the screen has changed, it's adapted to the times, it's grown, we've added sections to it. But basically, I don't care if you think your dog is aggressive. You can tell me that. That may be the thing that's concerning you. That may be what brought you in for a consultation, but I'm never going to ask you on a forum if you think your dog is aggressive. I am going to ask if somebody else told you the dog was aggressive, but what I want to know is what the dog does in certain contexts. So we have an aggression screen that includes no reaction, snarling, lifting your lip, barking, growling, snapping, biting, withdrawing. It's not applicable. You're never in that situation. That would be nice to know. And then there's a space for a trained response. If this was a trained protection dog, we do see a lot of working dogs, so it may be a trained response for them. This is sort of what it looks like. There's a more modern version now, but there are 53 questions, and they range from things with food and water dishes to what do you do with children of various ages. And pretty much every circumstance is in here. Toweling dogs, lifting their lip, putting your hands on them, disturbing them when they're sleeping, having another dog show up, correcting them by yelling, correcting them by hitting, taking them to a vet's office, putting them in a car, and having somebody approach the car. All the things that are common. And one of the things that people have asked me is, does it really matter that you've broken those behaviors into all those different categories? And I'm going to tell you it matters a lot, because the sequence and the rank of behaviors matters. Pathological behaviors often don't have the right sequence. They will have hidden a whole bunch of things early, and you will go to the end first. Okay. Most dogs test out what's going on, but a pathological dog doesn't. Okay. These questionnaires can be scored. They've been scored and used in imaging studies, not by me. The defensive or reactive behaviors versus the offensive, proactive patterns become clear if you use and score these questionnaires. Different neurochemical systems in different brain regions are involved in different parts of these responses. So, you know, growling, grumbling, posturing is very different than biting. By the time you get to snapping and biting, you have lost executive control in the frontal cortex. Non-pathological behaviors always have some aspect of a sequence that can be resurrected as interactions change. Non-pathological behaviors always have redundant signaling and choice. The face matches the body, matches the vocal signal, matches the action. Pathological behaviors don't have to have either of those things happen. In proactive aggression that is pathological, sequences condense, they may cease to exist, and you lose that redundant signaling. So all that warning that would come ahead that would make it clear what you wanted, it's all gone. Okay, so these do matter because they tell us. Somebody puts down on their form that the only thing their dog does is bite in those circumstances, and that turns out to be accurate. I'm going to be very concerned. As it turns out, you can get quite a high score and never have bitten anybody on that questionnaire. Simply you react to a huge number of circumstances, and then we have ways to score it that tell us whether, you know, you're impulsive, you're concerned, whatever. The most common reasons, and as I said, one of the things that those survey studies showed us was that most aggression is an anxiety disorder. But the most common reason that we see many of the aggressions has to do with fear. And you'll notice that the first thing was fear and anxiety, and then aggressions, and aggressions as anxiety disorders. So how do we distinguish between fear and anxiety, and does it matter? It matters a little bit from helping the clients to understand why their dogs don't do certain things. Fear and anxiety are different at the neuromolecular level. They use overlapping pathways. They don't necessarily use them in the same order. They are likely triggered by different sets of genes. You've only got a limited set of neurochemicals in your brain. Trust me, they're going to use them all. They just don't necessarily use them in the same order. And I'm going to show you a schematic of it. So some people consider fear and anxiety a continuum. Some neuroscientists, some consider them subsets of each other. Some consider them related, where they branch into very specific pathways in certain situations. For our purposes, fear is characterized by withdrawal and passive and active avoidance behaviors. So you don't want to engage, that are associated with the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic branch. And this is a function of risk or assessment of risk. So what you're doing is you think that's a risky situation. You want to take yourself out of it. You're aroused because the locus coeruleus blew a whole bunch of norepinephrine through your brain. It's in your amygdala, and the amygdala is sending out warning signs, and you're like, let me get out of here. It's a risk for me. True fear of social and physical situations always involves avoidance as a first choice. It may decrease the probability of social interaction. Monitoring and provocation, not avoidance, are the first choice in anxiety. Anxious dogs can't leave. They have to stay there. They have to monitor. They have no choice. And you see this mirrored in the behaviors they exhibit. Truly fearful dogs lower their bodies, their entire bodies, their necks, their heads, their tails, and appear to fold into their limbs in a form of social withdrawal. Whereas anxious dogs, in fact, do not do those things. They don't fold, they don't lower, they exhibit a much wider range of stances. Now, let me say something. If in any fearful and or fearful aggressive situation, the avoidance doesn't work and you still get attacked, you will change your tactic. You will suddenly learn that the best defense is a good offense. And when that happens, you know something pathological occurred. So when we look at anxiety in general, it's best defined as consistent exhibition of increased autonomic hyperactivity and hyperreactivity, increased motor activity, increased vigilance and scanning, and those things interfere with the normal range of social behaviors. This behavior is due to the apprehension of future risk. Fear, you're assessing something in front of you. Anxiety can be about something that hasn't happened and may not happen. And if it's pathological anxiety, it's always about something where you actually don't know the probability of it happening. You've exaggerated some component of that. And the pathology may be in part due to the inability to accurately assess anything. That may be your pathology. I can't make an accurate assessment. I can't process that information, and I can't make rational decisions based on it. So this apprehension of risk is characterized by the physical autonomic nervous system signs, and the more uncertain the situation in the dog's eyes, the worse it gets. And when we look at what we're really talking about with fear and anxiety, this is a lovely graphic from a neuropsychopharmacology review paper on the neuroendocrine effects of fear and anxiety. And they're really focusing on inflammation. And what happens here is that you can have fear, anxiety, worry, hypervigilance, avoidance, emotional dysregulation. Notice they've sort of lumped all of these together. They're going to tell you that the amygdala is involved, the medial prefrontal cortex is involved, the dorsal accessory regions involved, the insula is involved, the hypothalamus and the hippocampus are involved. And they're also going to tell you that when you have stress and trauma, you set off a series of inflammatory cytokines that themselves affect the insulin. People are really finally beginning to look at this. We're beginning to look at this. Then those things affect the hypothalamus and the pituitary, the amygdala, et cetera, and the hippocampus. Once you've triggered the amygdala and you've triggered, the pituitary, and you've triggered ACTH, you've got a classic adrenal response, and over time you will blunt that cortisol response. You'll get a bigger inflammatory response. You'll get a neurotrophic and neurokinin response, and you'll have more macrophages. You'll stimulate the inflammatory response more, and there you are. And now you're more reactive. And that's what happens in a pathological situation with inflammation contributing to this. So when we look at this, we have to realize that fear aggression occurs in situations where the affected dogs may have chosen escape for their fear, but they act as if they lack that choice. Fear aggression can be a reactive or a proactive aggression depending on the context, but different neurochemical systems are involved. And with time, as I said, passive escape and withdrawal may be attempted, but they get replaced by active aggression, true proactive aggression, reflecting a changing pathology in the amygdala and the hypothalamus. And we see these dogs becoming more hypervigilant with time in the context that provoke that fear, which leads to a heightened state of arousal at all times. And now if their trigger comes past, they flash. And this is why I hope I've implicitly made this clear, that once we're to the point of identifying true aggression, we have to treat it as early as possible. And I mean the first handful of incidents. I would much rather see a bunch of dogs under the age of 6 months than a bunch of dogs who are 5 years. Okay, your brain is going to remodel through 12 to 24 months of age. If we can augment that remodeling with medication that can help you learn appropriate responses, you can be virtually normal. Who would want to give that up? But people don't know. Okay, so let me just emphasize that inherent in these comparisons is that the response to a triggering circumstance is episodic in fear aggression. So in other words, you may only be afraid of dogs and they come past episodically. But that's not the only time you're aroused. This is a chronic anxiety condition, and you're chronically aroused for the reasons I just outlined in that neurochemical and neuroanatomical chart. And the chronic anxiety is actually the initial trigger. It's sitting there preparing you to expect the worst, and then it happens and bang, you're done. So here's a very classic dog in a fearfully aggressive posture. And notice that his ears are back, his tail is down. He's able to stand relatively normally when he's not forced to face me. He's wearing a muzzle because it's the way his owner feels comfortable with him. He's on a no pull harness. But you can see that this lovely little cattle dog has a hump over his shoulders and a hump over his rump. That's the classic bimodal piloerection pattern you see in dogs who are fearful and are more reactive. When you get very, very assertive dogs, trust me, this goes down a ridge over their shoulders or a ridge down their whole back. And when you get dogs who are going from proactive to reactive aggression and more anxiety, interestingly, their butt comes up as they're like, I'm reactive, but I'm learning not to do the really assertive stuff. I don't have my hair up in other places. And you can monitor this if you know the dog and you know what to look for. As soon as that dog has to turn around and face me, look at the change in his behavior. His ears come up, his eyes are intense, he's still piloerected, he's wagging his tail. Because a wagging tail only indicates a willingness to interact. And I went through a whole bunch of aggression videos with the students yesterday, and in every single one of them, the dogs were wagging their tails. And the students were just stunned because they had thought that was the exception. No, he's willing to interact. The interaction just may not be that which you wish. Now, if I had reached to him, he would have had no choice to lunge but to lunge at me. So we don't provoke this. But just by facing him, this is what happened. So fear aggression often occurs in the absence of an intended overt threat. I wasn't trying to threaten him. I didn't mean to threaten him. I didn't want to be a threat. When intended or overt threats occur, neither fear or fear aggression need be the choice. You could signal avoidance and disengagement and signal a lack of threat and ramp down arousal levels. That's actually what Annie was doing when she didn't want to be humped. But dogs with a pathology cannot do that. And now everything is treated as if it was intended or overt. And that's what happens as pathology progresses. And pathology does progress. So here's a dog. This is a laboratory beagle from our teaching group.
I want her to look at me.
And he's just, we're evaluating him. My resident, Dr. Camille Square, and I are evaluating him. That's Melissa. Melissa runs all the labs. Melissa Hamill. She's fantastic. She's amazing with these dogs, and she's taught them all the behavior mod. They know tricks. They do high fives. They put out their nails to have them clipped. She makes these dogs have a wonderful life. Camille just gave that dog a treat, but I'm walking around with a video camera, and this dog does not want to look at me. Notice that every time I try to look at the dog, and I've got this fake eye, the video camera, the dog goes away. Okay, let me show you what happened in the next video.
Well, you just reacted to the noise of the video camera.
Yeah, and it has a lid that smacks. It's just a handy cam, and he reacted to that noise. So he moves away from us. He's going to Melissa again. Anything but pay attention to us. And even when Melissa goes to pet him, notice he puts his neck down, he picks up his paw. He's worried. Look at his worried brow. He's got a grimace.
Okay, so then I saw in the April email of adoptions, like this past April, right? Was that?
These dogs are adopted out at a certain age or after a certain time in the colony. And if the colony isn't working out for them, we also try to rehome them in suitable homes, which is what this is an evaluation for. How much risk would he pose for some people, given that he's tremendously fearful and worries a little bit about some of the other dogs. He licks his lips. He's doing some displacement behaviors. He's going off and he's scratching. He's avoiding us like the plague. And we've all got treats. He knows we've all got treats. He's pacing, he's panting. You know, this isn't the normal behavior of a happy beagle in these colonies. They would be coming up to you wanting treats and pets and belly rubs, and that's certainly not what he's doing. Okay, so you see how worried these little guys can get.
Now, more often than not, they get great homes.
Now he's asking to be picked up by Melissa, who is definitely his love. She is the safety zone for all of these dogs. They all feel better. Now watch what happens and ignore the camera angles, because this is interesting. So I offer him a treat. I let him smell my hand. I've still got the dreaded camera. I've put it down and I've asked Camille to use my cell phone or her cell phone. We're doing some touching, which he knows. He knows touch, treat,
Wow.
That's a fearfully aggressive dog. And all I was, and Melissa's holding her hands up. She put them down immediately. No one was hurt, including the dog. The dog is right there.
I think I have.
And the reason that I was working on the back of that dog's neck is one of the things that we had concerns about is he lowers his neck and he sometimes growls. Does he have neck pain? And you saw what happens. That's a fearfully aggressive dog. Okay, that was out of context in every way possible. It was out of order in a sequence. It was more intense than it needed to be, et cetera, et cetera. What about dogs that fight with other dogs? Well, interdog aggression is a diagnosis, not a description. It involves consistent, not one-off, volitional, proactive aggression that's not contextual given the social signals, the threat level, or the response received, just like that dog. Must occur in an animal for whom it's been there, it's static, or it's progressive. It can't have just started. It can't involve a sudden change in behavior because that could be pain. And this is a diagnosis about social relationships. Female-female aggression is far more common than male-male aggression. In interdog aggression, passive components are key, and they're often unnoticed or mistaken by clients. Dogs will displace other dogs from resting places. They'll control activities, access sites or resources. They'll stare. Aggressors will stare at the other dog, and the victim will avoid the aggressor or the places where the aggressor is and avoid the stares. Okay. Now, clients misread behaviors. Here's one of my patients, and they brought in the two dogs in the household, the other dog who had done this, and said, she's just beating him up. And I said to them, I'm sorry, but this dog, the yellow dog, not the black dog, the yellow dog's the aggressor. And why? Because this is a slit on this dog's ear. And this dog has pushed the other dog and pushed the other dog and been a threat. And when the dog finally, we're having our own little interdog training session in the background here. When that dog finally went for the black dog only choice was to grab the ear in the cheek, because if you do that, they cannot turn around and get your neck. And that's how ears get damaged. So 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, if you see this, this is the dog that was the aggressor, and the clients have missed stuff. These are two of my dogs who, again, are no longer with us. But Emma, who was so wonderful, was a year here. This is Tess, and this is Christmas. This is a Christmas tree in the background. And I was just taking Christmas pictures. And it wasn't until we had a tragedy that I went back and I looked at the pictures, because I missed all of this. I do this for a living, and I missed this. So here Emma's crouching on the couch. This is a love seat. Who has most of the love seat? Who's staring at her? And she's looking away. She has a toy who's staring at her and actually lifting her lip. And she's monitoring that without looking directly at the dog, because she knows she's at risk. Fast forward 6 months later, I caught this interaction as we crossed a bridge on the property. Emma had been swimming, and she turned around. Tessie's shaking her head. She's shaking off the snarl that Emma just directed towards her. Flash is trying to get between them and act as an intermediary dog. And what we had a week later was a fight where Tessie grabbed Emma by the neck, and Emma ended up in the emergency room with blood in her retinas and a partially crushed trachea. I missed it. I'm sure other people can miss it. They ended up both by living through this. They lived separately for the rest of their lives. Given that Tessie was only 3, that was another 11 years. And this was all because Emma was becoming socially mature and Tess was not normal. And I think we have to ask ourselves, do dogs need to like each other? Given how they came into our lives and we structure our canine families, I think they may not. Here's a case of interdog aggression with dogs that are just mismatched.
Teddy. Enough. Go to your room. Go to your room. Tigger, go to your room. Go to your room. No.
And there's the poor victim dog who is doing nothing. She just wants the right to exist. And after their appointment, they went home and the client sent this picture. They were so exhausted, they actually shared the couch just at other ends. And all this poor pity mix wants is just to be able to live in that house. Some interdog aggression can be lethal. And this is a situation where there is a mediator dog, but there are 4 dogs, 5 people in a very small room. This is an old video from the University of Pennsylvania, but it's a great video. And we'll watch the whole sequence. It's a few minutes. I'll fast forward at some point, but I want you to see this because we've got this little dog here standing in the middle of the room. We've got 2 German Shepherds, a white Shepherd and a classic German Shepherd. And we've got a rescue greyhound sitting in the background there. So let me. So I'm going to fast forward through a little bit of it. So now we're playing with a roll of vet wrap. We didn't have toys in the room. We did after that.
I know, well, that's a surgery.
So the only dog who seems really interested in playing with this isn't any of the dogs who's had it.
Do they like squeakies, squeak toys?
No.
Dolls.
Pushy dive a little.
Oh, sorry, it went back. Let me fast forward it again. I just. There we go.
Probably round up a ball. And rawhides are lethal, is that correct? I mean.
As long as they all have their.
Now, I'm going to stop. When this greyhound walks by, take a good look at her. All of those shaved areas are areas of punctures. One of these dogs did it. She had drains in there until the week before this appointment. Her neck, her shoulders, her back, her chest, the sides of her arms. So pay attention because you're going to see the extent of this attack.
Trying one in the middle of the room and not be good. Okay. Why shouldn't I want to play?
You know what that thought?
Now, she doesn't really want that toy. The greyhound does want it. You can see where this dog has been injured. It's a little reactive to being touched. These are massive areas of damage. She wants it.
Foxy.
Now watch what's going to
They're not
happen.
really very cooperative about this being on camera. So.
The white shepherd just blocked that little mixed breed from getting to the greyhound. Watch what's going to happen. Foxy's now stalking that dog. She's wagging her tail. There's where she would have gone for her, and both shepherds make a safe escape for
And then
her.
of course blood.
So there's a situation where what we've got are mediator dogs realizing that the other dog's pathological and making a safe shoot for her in a room that's an impossible situation. It was a horrible design. I should never have allowed that to happen, but it got us great videos. So there's a case of true pathology where a dog would kill another dog, and that dog is a lot smaller than that greyhound, and she will kill her. They improved. We did a lot of environmental modification. We did medication. It improved. The last aggression I just want to take a couple of minutes to talk about is impulse control or social aggression, social control aggression. And a lot of people call this conflict aggression. It's abnormal, inappropriate, out of context aggression exhibited by dogs towards people, generally people. I think we've seen a couple of cases of it exhibited towards dogs recently. But people under any circumstance involving passive or active control of the dog's behavior or the dog's access to the behavior. Any passive or active correction or interruption of the dog's behavior or the dog's access to the behavior intensifies this aggression. And this is a diagnosis that's about using control and controlling behaviors to gain information about what the dog perceives to be uncertain circumstances. So in other words, you may have 2 people in the household. One never gets growled at, the other is always growled at. And one of them, the dog can read well and feels good about and doesn't think they're a threat. And the other one, they're uncertain. So these dogs often, you'll sit down, they'll sit next to you, You'll move, they'll growl. And they want to see what you'll do if they growl. You go to take a toy, they'll growl, they're uncertain. They want to see what you'll do. Are you a risk to them? They can't sit back and get the information from context. These anxious and provocative and controlling dogs use these aggressive behaviors and provocative questions to ask to help them assess risk. Part of the pathology is they can't sit back. They can't get information without forcing it out of somebody. They can't calm down long enough. They're at an arousal level of glutamate and norepinephrine where they can't calm down long enough to not react and just let the situation transpire. The pathology involves a very strict rule structure. They provoke everything and make their decisions based on the provocation. The only great news about that is behavior mod is a very strict rule structure and it changes hands beautifully. So if we give them a humane set of rules where they can get information helpful to them and some medication, these dogs blossom. And the take-home message is dogs work for accurate information. This is what good behavior modification provides. So Spy is a 3.5-year-old female spayed Dalmatian. She was obtained at 2 months of age. She was neutered at 7 months of age. The trainer recommended withdrawing attention from the dog, dominating the dog, and controlling all access to food. Okay, this is Spy. Of those 53 aggressive, and notice she's wearing a prong collar because that's what the trainer told them to put her in. 53 categories on our aggression screen. She reacted to 16 of them. She would snap or try to bite in 12 of those. She's never bitten anybody. And this is what the trainer told them to do to feed her. And I'll fast forward through some parts of this. But watch what she has to do to be fed. She's coming out of her crate.
Yes.
She gets one kibble at a time at first. She has to lie down.
Yes.
Then she gets another kibble. She has to speak.
The girl.
She has to do all these tricks.
And now the hard one. Matt. Down.
She's hungry. This is her meal.
When can you roll over?
I mean, can you imagine somebody asking you to do all of this to eat?
Down.
And she's having trouble doing it. And notice that the client is getting more and more forceful. And she finally, it takes a long time to get this dog to roll over, which is what she wants the dog to do. And now the dog can have some food. And the husband approaches, and this is what the dog does. The dog will eat and growl and choke because this dog has impulse control aggression. This dog has food-related aggression. The husband has taken the food away from the dog and wrestled the dog to the ground to win.
Easy. Easy.
She can't do easy. Cooper's a 9-month-old male castrated English Springer Spaniel. He was obtained at 2 months of age from a reliable breeder. The partner feels that dogs should submit and you must correct and dominate them. And this dog, also with a secure puppyhood, cared greatly about food and would steal it. He also frequently was given raw marrow bones, which is happening here. Watch this, because this is where you see anxiety and fear come together. If you try to stare at this dog, correct this dog, shove this dog from the sofa, he'll try to bite you. But they have just given him yet another knuckle bone, despite our instructions. And what he is doing, he's growling and urinating. Square mouth, jaw, growling and urinating, because that is what happens when you beat an impulsively aggressive dog and they add fear to this. He will fight you to the death, but you've made him terrified. And that's what happened to that dog. Finn is an 18-month-old male castrated golden retriever. He was obtained at 2 months of age from a reliable pet quality breeder. At 7 months, he needed shoulder surgery and prolonged immobilization and cage rest. And that went on for a couple of months and it wasn't good for him. So here's Finn, and this is This is when they get home. He was a vet student, and his wife was his girlfriend was also a student. And Finn's got his toy, and they have learned you don't take toys when Finn is lying on them, because
You okay?
that will trigger this. Control or access to control. Instead, ask him to work with you. Now you can take his toy because he knows you're not a threat. You asked him to work with you. You didn't try to control him.
Oh boy.
Now, once he has it, you don't take it again. You wait till he gives it to you, or you encourage him to give it to you.
Can I see?
He says, I don't know. You might take it. And you can see Finn's uncertain. And he would growl and snap, and he has bitten.
You okay?
And that's the look he gets when he's uncertain. So what does the human do? Back off and ask him to come. The appropriate response to a dog who is looking for information, can't get it from the environment, and thinks that he needs to provoke things to find out who's a risk. This is the girlfriend. Notice he just mouthed a little bit. She's the one who does 90% of the training. And the first thing she says is she holds his mouth and says, no biting. And she's taught him that that's an okay behavior.
Come here. Then. Oh.
And now he can be petted
boy.
because he doesn't have that toy. So when is aggression a cry for help, which was our tagline? So many behaviors labeled as aggressive or aggression involve agonistic signaling designed to communicate hidden information and preferences and to clarify unclear circumstances. We need to do a much better job of teaching vets, vet students, clients, and trainers to understand that. That whole set of stuff is ignored, and it can't be ignored. That's a fundamental of communication. Out of context aggression that may be indicative of a behavioral pathology is always a cry for help. These dogs don't want to be aggressive. They feel they don't have a choice. It doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. All of these dogs are trapped in their heads. And it's a cry for help in explaining what's not understood and best addressed early. And all pathological aggressions progress. They can all reach a point where signaling plays a diminished role, and the behavior is just about stopping it, stopping the interaction, stopping the noise in the dog's head, banishing the participants, and it's much harder to treat when the dog thinks the aggression is necessary or protects them, no matter how irrational this is. Think of aggression as a cry for help and separate out the normal communication signals. If you need more information, my email addresses, you can always, we do distance consults that go through the local vet, but we talk to the client. And you can do that. You can find out all of our clinic information at avcbehavioralmed@upi.ca. That's our email address. You can find out about the clinics at the Animal Welfare Center, the Sir James Dunn Animal Welfare Center site. Go to the behavioral medicine section. This is the journal in the field. I've already told you we're having a fall webinar series because you're participating. And we are also this year offering a week-long intensive course in veterinary behavioral medicine to vets. It filled in a month. I imagine it's going to become a regular feature. So I'll pause and I'll take any questions. And I see there's something in the Q&A. I've seen dogs grab other dogs by the scruff before. Is this behavior always aggressive, or is it also situational? It's also situational. If you think back to Annie sitting on the sofa after Gabriel had tried to mount her at the end, what does she do? She grabs him by the scruff. She grabs him by the corner of his cheek. She grabs him by his ear. And all of that is just to say to him, I'm not going to let you do anything. I'm going to do this and you're going to not bug me, and I'm going to do that and you're not going to bug me, and I'm going to do this and you're not going to bug me, and you're going to listen to me and you're not going to mount me. Anything else?
Thanks, Karen. As always, that was a fantastic summary of a very complex issue. So
incredibly complex. Didn't really do it justice, but it gave people a flavor.
Oh, for sure. And there's another question in the Q&A box. So what other pathologies do you most likely see with hyperreactive dogs who show aggression?
Boy, that's a really good question. And with these hyper-reactive dogs who show aggression, what's interesting is many of them react to noises. Many of them react to changed circumstances. So you may see them react to humans and they may react to dogs. You would see them reacting to dogs. They could react to humans in some situations. But the place we really see this is noises and movement. And it's a great question.
I have a quick question for you, Karen, because I know this is something we're both interested in, but has there been much research on the effect of early life trauma or epigenetics on aggression, pathological aggression later in life?
Yeah, no, we all know from the rodent studies and from some of the human literature, especially on interpersonal violence with intimate partners, that kids, whether they're rodent kids or human kids that result from those stressful in utero environments, are far more reactive. They have increased arousal levels. They arouse to a higher level. They're out of context. They may not follow sequences, all the things we talked about. There's not a lot known. We're really lucky that we have the funding this summer to start to look at this in puppies. So if any of you are in the Atlantic Canada area, you may want to file this away and tell people. We're about to start a study where we're looking for about 50 puppies that are willing to see us 4 times over the next year. And we're hoping to get a pretty even distribution of puppies who were raised in the home without any stressor, without any potential epigenetic effects. They don't have to be show dogs. They could just be pet raised dogs. They could be an accidental pregnancy that's raised in kind and humane circumstances. And we're hoping for about 25 dogs, that young puppies that came from shelters. Mom was orphaned, mom was in the shelter, mom may have died. It may have been a puppy mill dog. It may have been an online purchase dog. In other words, we're using those dogs as flags for dogs that may have had potential trauma. And we anticipate, and we've got an entire inflammatory panel, an entire physiological panel. We're going to spend about $100,000 of other people's money measuring things in these dogs over the course of a year. And we anticipate that we will be able to identify the early physiological and inflammatory and epigenetic effects. We're going to look at telomeres. And we also anticipate, and the driving force for doing this study is to find the place in a standardized test where these dogs first differ from each other. And those are the behaviors we're going to ask vets to start to test for. Because in kids who have epigenetic effects, we have neurodevelopmental landmarks. We don't measure those in dogs and cats, and we need to start doing that. So there is no extant data out there. We're hoping to produce some.
And a follow-up question to that, what's the age range in the upcoming study in dogs? What are you looking
We
for?
will not take a dog younger than 8 months of age. I'm sorry, 8 weeks of age. And we are hoping to get most of the pups in the 8 to 12 month, I keep saying month. This is a result of no sleep. 8 to 12 week age group, so that they'll be 2 to 3 months of age. However, we're in Prince Edward Island, and we know we may not be able to get 50 dogs over the course of the summer that are 8 to 12 weeks of age. We hope we will. We can't really take full litters. I mean, we will certainly test them, but we really need 50 independent dogs. So we need dogs from 50 litters. And we can add more dogs from the litter. That's not a problem, but I need that baseline. And if we can't get that, we will enlarge this to 4 months. I think after 4 months, we're going to be in trouble. But I'm really, really, really hoping we see this early enough that we've got enough points that we can block the study. Boy, there are some really good questions here. And Lisbeth said, what about concurrent physical diseases such as obesity, diabetes, intestinal diseases? Are there correlations or patterns in dogs? Oh, I'm positive there are correlations or patterns in dogs. That last golden retriever we saw, I think that much of his impulse control aggression was a response to being hurt. In other words, he learned that the best way to control the orthopedic exam was to get aggressive. And then it transferred. And I think the intestinal stuff we don't look at enough. I'm positive it's there. The inflammation response alone, Lisbeth argues that it's there. Pierrette said, what's the start date of this research? In theory, and we've been on strike, so there could be a little bit of a delay. We had planned to start collecting data the first week. The last week of May, enroll the dogs, and to start collecting data the first couple of weeks of June. So we were hoping to enroll the dogs starting the very last week of May through the first couple of weeks of June and start testing the dogs early in June, and then test continuously. Fortunately, Tracy Doucette, who's a psychology professor, is on sabbatical this year. She's spending it with us. So she's going to be available to test these dogs all year round. And we also have a fellow coming from Turkey. Yasmin Salgurli will be here for a year. She'll be available to test the dogs all year round. One of my residents and graduate students, Jen Vernick, is going to be available, but she's also got other duties. So we've got a team who will be able to do this. With regard to anxiety's tendency of first choice to be monitoring provocation, can you speak to this regarding fence barking? Oh, I love this. Or what's colloquially referred to as territorial behavior. Yeah, well, once you've got a marker of where the edge is, you've lost your uncertainty. So dogs have learned that they can actually threaten without reprisal. And there's nothing wrong with barking. But the problem is people don't act normally at fences, and sometimes dogs don't act normally. And I have a very, very protective dog who is sitting right on my knee right now, and I'm petting. But if you were to talk to him like he was a normal dog when he's at the fence, protecting everything because he knows exactly where that boundary is, he would be fine. If you freeze, he views you as a threat. If I open the gate and you call his name, that goes away immediately because now he understands the difference. But he's a normal dog. Now think of what happens when they're not normal. That should answer that question. Yeah.